The sound of car tires crushing gravel filled the quiet evening air as Julian Coleman, the 48-year-old man with a calm demeanor and a reputation for leadership, turned onto Sycamore Avenue. He was returning home after a long but productive day spent meeting with community leaders in Charlotte, North Carolina. His car, a modest black sedan, blended into the suburban streets as his thoughts turned to his wife's famous roast beef dish waiting for him at home. But suddenly, blue and red lights flashed in the rearview mirror, piercing the darkness of the night like an alarm bell. Julian tightened his grip on the steering wheel for a moment, then quickly glanced at the speedometer, 29 miles per hour in a 35 zone. No traffic violations, no broken lights, yet the sirens were blaring, demanding him to pull over. "Stay calm," he muttered to himself as he signaled and pulled his car over to the side of the road. He knew the procedures well. Keep your hands visible, move slowly, be polite. He had mastered these things, not because he had done anything wrong, but because he learned that appearances mean everything in these situations. The officer approached his window quickly, holding a flashlight, its beam cutting through the dim darkness of the car. There was another officer standing by the rear bumper, his hand resting on his weapon. "Were you in a hurry tonight?" the first officer asked, his voice filled with suspicion. "No, sir," Julian replied in a calm but firm tone. "I'm just heading home." The officer shined the flashlight on Julian's face, pausing a moment longer than necessary, then moved it to the dashboard and then back to his face. "Your license and registration," the officer ordered, ignoring Julian's answer. Julian moved slowly toward the glove compartment, narrating each movement he made in a clear voice. "I'm opening the compartment to get the registration now, and my license is in my wallet. I'll take it out after that." The officer didn't reply, but he clearly straightened up. "Do you know why I stopped you?" the officer asked. Although the question seemed rhetorical, before Julian could answer, the officer continued saying, "You were driving erratically, swerving into the other lane." Julian frowned and said respectfully, "With all due respect, I wasn't swerving. I have a camera installed in the car that can prove it," but the officer interrupted him sharply. "A camera in the car? It will be confiscated as evidence. Step out of the car." Julian opened his eyes in surprise at this sudden escalation and asked calmly, "Is there a problem, sir? I am fully complying." The officer clenched his jaw and said angrily, "I told you to get out of the car now." Julian felt a knot in his stomach, but he unfastened his seatbelt and slowly opened the door, raising his hands clearly. The second officer moved quickly, grabbed Julian's arm and pulled him roughly toward the patrol car. "Is this necessary?" Julian asked, his voice steady but firm. The first officer laughed mockingly and replied, "Resisting arrest? Want to play games? That's fine. I've got you." Julian felt the sharp coldness of the metal cuffs on his wrists. His mind was racing. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a clear act of targeting. When the officers put Julian in the back seat of the police car, he glanced quickly at the neighborhood. Some neighbors were silently watching from behind their curtains, but no one dared to intervene. But this wasn't the end. The officers had no idea who the man they stopped was, and Julian wasn't planning to stay silent. At the police station, the surprise began. When they arrived at the station, Julian was put into a cold cell while the two officers reviewed his papers. One of them, frustrated, said his record was clean. The other laughed sarcastically. "We'll find something. People like him always have secrets." Julian heard their conversation, but he didn't show any reaction. He wasn't angry. Instead, he was calculating every next move. After a few hours, a lieutenant named Morgan approached the cell, and she seemed displeased with the way Julian had been treated. "Why didn't you review the camera footage?" she asked sharply. The two officers didn't have a convincing answer. "Do it now. And Daniels, come to my office immediately." When the truth came out, everyone was shocked. After reviewing the cameras, everything was revealed. There was no violation, and there was no resistance. Julian was released immediately, but before he left, Lieutenant Morgan sat with him and said, "I feel like you're someone more important than you claim. Who are you?" Julian smiled calmly and said, "I'll just say that I know how the system works." Julian left the station, but he didn't go home. Instead, he headed to the police headquarters that he managed. Good morning, Chief Coleman. When he entered his office, his assistant Anita looked at him in surprise. Sir, you're here early. He looked at her and said, It was a long night, Anita. Prepare the meeting room for me. I'll address the department this evening. The chaos is over. Now comes reckoning. Julian gathered all the officers and said firmly, What happened to me last night is not just an isolated incident, but part of a bigger problem, and I'm here to make sure it stops. The two officers were immediately suspended, and radical changes began in the department, including strict reforms, mandatory training courses, and real accountability. The law must be applied fairly, not with discrimination. This is how change is achieved through actions, not words. In the following days, the case made headlines and became the talk of the community. The video of the arrest quickly spread on social media, sparking a wave of public outrage, not only in Charlotte, but across the entire country. The community is acting. Peaceful protests erupted, demanding accountability for officers and major police reforms. Community leaders, activists, and city residents gathered outside the police headquarters, holding signs that read, Justice is not optional, protect us, don't harm us, and no one is above the law. The media was everywhere, and press cameras followed every move of Julian Coleman. At one of the press conferences, Julian stood in front of the microphones and looked at the angry yet hopeful crowd. This is not a battle against the police, but a battle for a better police force. He started his speech saying, I stand here not only as chief of police, but also as a citizen, a father, and someone who understands injustice. This moment is more than a news story. It's a chance for real change. We will not tolerate the abuse of power, and we will make sure that everyone in this department understands that justice is not just a slogan, but a daily commitment. The changes will begin immediately in the coming days. Julian Coleman announced radical reforms within the department. Officers Daniels and Reed were dismissed after an internal investigation confirmed their fabrication and abuse of power. An independent unit was created to review citizens' complaints about police misconduct. All officers must complete intensive anti-bias and anti-discrimination training. Body cameras are required and their footage is regularly reviewed for transparency. A confidential hotline is now available to report police force violations. The law must be applied fairly, not discriminately. The impact extends beyond Charlotte. The changes did not stop at the Charlotte Police Department alone. Other cities began reviewing their policies, and calls for national reforms increased. An emergency meeting was held between the governor and security officials to discuss broader reforms at the state level. In a television interview, Julian Coleman was asked, Did you expect things to take such a big turn? He smiled and calmly said, I wasn't looking for fame or media attention, I was looking for justice. But it seems that the time has come to make a real difference. 6 months later, half a year after the incident, the police department was a completely different place. The relationship between the police and the community improved, and reports of misconduct began to decrease noticeably. One night, during an inspection tour, Julian stopped at one of his small police stations and noticed a young officer speaking kindly with a local resident, instead of acting arrogantly. He approached him and asked, How do you feel being in this station today? The young officer smiled and said, I feel proud to be part of this change. Mr. President, the law protects the people. It is not a weapon against them. And so, the arrest of Julian Coleman was not just a passing incident, but the beginning of a reformist revolution that changed the face of the police and restored people's trust in justice. A year after the incident, the city of Charlotte became a model for police reform. It wasn't just superficial changes, but a real transformation in how police officers interacted with citizens. The results of the reforms, a 40% decrease in misconduct complaints within a single year. Increased public trust in the police after surveys showed a significant rise in resident satisfaction with officers' conduct. Strengthening internal oversight with the establishment of an independent committee including lawyers, activists, and citizens to monitor police performance. Improving training to include practical scenarios about implicit bias and how to handle sensitive situations without unnecessary escalation. A television article with Julian Coleman. A year later, Julian Coleman appeared on a popular talk show to discuss the change he had made. The host. Mr. Coleman, when you were arrested a year ago, Did you imagine that this would be the beginning of comprehensive reform? Julian Coleman. Honestly, at that moment, all I thought about was protecting myself and ensuring my safety. But I knew that this incident wouldn't just pass by unnoticed, and that I would use this opportunity to make real change. The host. Did you face internal resistance when implementing these reforms? Julian Coleman. Of course. Not everyone was happy with these changes. Some officers saw them as a restriction on their work, but I made it clear to them that these changes were not against the police, but for the police, to restore the trust and respect we had lost. The host. Today, after a year has passed, how would you describe the situation in the police department? Julian Coleman. I am proud of my team. We are working together to improve our community and learning from our mistakes. We still have a long way to go, but we are heading in the right direction. National recognition. Julian's impact was not limited to his city. His reforms became a model nationwide. Mayors and police chiefs in other cities began implementing similar programs, and awareness campaigns about citizens' rights and the importance of police accountability emerged. Julian Coleman was honored at a special ceremony. Julian Coleman received the Leadership in Criminal Justice Award in recognition of his efforts to turn the crisis into an opportunity for reform. When he stepped onto the stage, he said his famous words, which became a slogan for reforms across the country. The law should be a shield to protect citizens, not a weapon against them. A victory for justice and a new beginning. As the audience stood applauding him, this was not just a moment of tribute, but a declaration that change is possible when there are leaders who have the courage to confront injustice and work for a fairer future for everyone.